Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Addict's Advocate. I am your host, Dusty Dean, and it is my pleasure to welcome Micah and Michelle Sawyer to the show. How are you guys?
We're doing well, thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you.
I'm good. Thank you for coming onto the show today. I met you through actually the power of my wife seeing an article on the news about you and some of the things that you are doing to help make life more manageable, better for those suffering in this world. And I don't want to give anything away because there's obviously a story before this service to society that you're doing ever got created. And so with that, we're going to be talking today about Micah's Hugs. And Micah's Hugs is a beautiful nonprofit that is here to help those suffering. And without further ado, please take it away, you guys. Tell me your story.
So I lost my son just over 6 years ago to fentanyl poisoning, fentanyl overdose. Everybody has a different things that they call it these days. It's changing. But anyway, I lost my son to fentanyl. And the grief of that was pretty devastating. It was really devastating. And, the things that we've done to try to help ourselves overcome that grief, and what I've done to overcome that grief has been in trying to help other people has really helped me overcome that grief. My son was we try to tell his story a little bit and tell a little bit about him because he was a star athlete. He was captain of the football team, youngest kid to be brought up to play varsity football when he was 14 years old. He won the weightlifting competition at Italy High School, super popular kid. He was not the kid that you thought was going to be struggling with a drug problem. He was the kid that everybody thought was going to be the most successful, the most popular, all those things. But, while he was breaking weightlifting records, he was struggling with drugs at the same time, and he was sort of hiding depression and sadness that he was feeling that he didn't let people on to know because he was this strong, successful guy. You can't be struggling, you can't be sad. So he was struggling with that at the same time and hiding it. And after high school, it got harder and harder for him to deal with his addiction and deal with his substance problems, and it sort of got more and more out of control. And we went through a time where we had the kid that was the super successful sports jock, most popular, that all of a sudden became super struggling and not dealing with life so well. And for a while, he basically became homeless, living in his car on the streets, which was like a giant shock. Like, how did this successful kid become struggling so hard? And then, we went through years and years of back and forth and ups and downs and getting clean and then relapsing again. Really, really working through that. And they say, like, my addiction for a while became trying to save my addict. That kind of consumed my life for quite a while. And it was really, really overwhelming for me while he was struggling. And, he got clean there after a number of years, and he was about 7 months, I believe, that he was clean. And that was right around the time when fentanyl started becoming introduced into everything at that time. And he was struggling with a heroin addiction. But he worked for me for quite a while, and when his habits started, really, really slipping, and he didn't show up for work one day, and I went looking for him when he was staying at a friend's house, and I went and found him at a friend's house, and I had to really struggle to wake him up. And at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he should have been awake and at work. And I said to him, what's going on? This is not right. This is wrong. What's happening? And he looked at me and he said, Dad, I've been smoking heroin. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, that was 7 years ago, I guess, at this point. And at that point, this whole opioid thing wasn't quite as well known. The fentanyl thing wasn't quite as well known. We were just starting on this whole path that we now know a lot more about. And so realizing that, and it was amazing. It just changed our lives at that point of how we started struggling through this thing. And like I said, we went through these number of years of ups and downs and going through programs and getting clean and having good points. And there was a point where we thought he might even be a drug and alcohol counselor because he would help other people that were struggling. He'd call them and ask how they were doing. They'd call him when they were struggling. So in the end, he got clean, and he was living with his mom for a while, and he got clean for about 7 months, and he had a job. He was doing pretty good, but then he had a relapse, and he smoked black tar heroin that was laced with fentanyl, and that's what killed him in the end after being clean and doing well for about 7 months. And he had that relapse, and that was right when fentanyl was coming onto the scene. And that fentanyl, laced into that black tar heroin, and people used to think that you couldn't really die from smoking it. Well, it definitely can, and that's what he passed away from. He had a phobia from needles, so he never actually injected anything. He would always just smoke it, and that's what ended up killing him. And that's what, made us want to, after going through the grief of losing him and all the pain and suffering that we went through, that's what made us want to start doing what we're doing now to try to help other families not have to go through that same misery and that same suffering that we went through as a family, everybody in the family, all the people around him, and how many people that affected. So that's why we started the organization that we have now, trying to help others.
First of all, thank you for sharing, and I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Obviously, those are some of the scariest parts of recovery.
Yeah.
We know that this is progressive, and it obviously sounds like he was dealing with some mental struggles, right? And that's one of the things that I personally am very much advocating, because a lot of times there's a big question now in society about what's coming first, because there was always this notion of addiction is causing mental illness. Well, unfortunately, a lot of times they're finding out that it was actually the mental illness that's driving some sort of a reprieve from that pain and that suffering. And drugs are basically the option to do that, or alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think,
So,
what we found is there's very few cases. We help a lot of people now getting into different programs or getting help that they needed. There's very few cases, I think, that where you come across an addict that isn't actually struggling from some sort of mental health issue, that's not, sort of trying to self-medicate with their substance, whatever their substance may be. They're sort of trying to self-medicate for some pain, some suffering, some anguish that they're feeling, some trauma.
absolutely. I suffer from depression and anxiety, and I recognized it, and I still fought with it because, again, I was just covered in shame and guilt about it. I didn't want to be kind of labeled as this person. And so I was going to muscle through life. And ultimately, I had reprieves, where I'd stopped, drinking was my biggest problem, alcohol. And I went through two separate stints where I quit for like 6 years. And the first time I relapsed, it was a year and I had to put it away. And the next relapse, which was my last one, was something that the trajectory of this crash was so steep, and the physical symptoms came on so rapidly that I recognized at that point, at the very bitter end of it, that I cannot survive this way anymore. I will kill myself. It won't be intentional, but I will. And I think, so one of the things that I'm very much an advocate for is, number one, it's difficult to sometimes see the signs because we mask so well, and we don't want to disappoint people. We don't want to burden people. We want to, and so, our brains have become our own worst enemies in these things. And so, if anybody out there is recognizing something is wrong, right, that's the first step of the change. And there's 4 more to come with it, but you gotta be willing to break that wall of shame and guilt, because there are people in this world that love you and understand what it is. And we're not going to be making you feel less than because of what you're struggling with. I tell people that if addiction showed what it's capable of at the beginning of it all, we'd have a lot fewer addicts. But it's a cunning thing, and it's something that it slowly sucks it sucks in your life. But right, what you're saying is that, I'm very much an advocate of it. Number one, it just works for society if we just become more compassionate with each other. If we stop judging, if we start trying to empathize and understand, what somebody's struggling with. And because we're all complex beings and we're all got something that we're managing. And,
empathy is the one word that I always say, if there's one thing that we could all do better in life to make this world a better place, it's to have more empathy. Empathy, I think, is like the strongest word that we can all work on, trying to have more empathy.
Yeah. And you guys are walking the walk and talking the talk, and showing that, his death wasn't in vain. His death wasn't in vain. There's beauty coming from it. I know that he's looking down, so proud of you guys. And it sounds like he had, up until the point he had a pretty full life. I mean, he was accomplishing a lot of things, even in his struggles. And that's, there's a lot of people in this world that are very high functioning.
Absolutely.
Addicts, right? They can make you not think. They can run circles around you and still be struggling every day when they get home. And it's not always when we make this notion, right? Because people hear smoking black tar heroin and they go, oh my goodness. And they immediately put this vision in their mind of what this person looks like. I know I was guilty of it before I came to my own admission about addiction. And so it's not, the homeless person necessarily on the sidewalk, because the crazy thing about it is that we're coming to find out more about those homeless people. And a lot of it isn't even about drug use. That's actually the smallest factor. But
the symptom, the drug use is more of a symptom than it is actually the cause.
Right. Exactly. With Micah's Hugs, how long after the passing of Junior did you start this?
It seems like we kind of started almost pretty quick after Micah passed, because it just started out with a member getting a hold of Micah and saying, hey, I lead these, treatments programs, and was just wondering if you'd come in and tell the story. So when Micah came in and started talking, you could just see him, just a big change in him. It was like therapy to him to be talking about his son. But you would think it would almost be the opposite because bringing up sad stories, but you saw how much he was healing over it. So shortly after, we kind of just dove into starting up a nonprofit. I don't even think it was a full year later we had the Micah's Hugs started, and it was right during COVID. How appropriate our name, Micah's Hugs. We can't hug people.
When Micah passed away at his memorial service, there was a lot of people that got up. It was a huge memorial service. Everybody came because he was, such a sort of popular, loved person. Mm-hmm. And the biggest thing that people said is they were going to miss his big bear hugs. And that's where we came up with the name of Micah's Hugs. We thought that was just sort of perfect for, what he was and what he was doing. But, we sort of started Micah's Hugs in the beginning we didn't have a plan to start a nonprofit or to start this organization. We just sort of were there trying to see, if we could help people. Actually, the very first project that we did is that Micah's, best friend and his ex-girlfriend came to his memorial service, and they were struggling, and we knew that they were struggling when they came to the memorial service. And from the memorial service, they disappeared, and their families couldn't find them for like 3 months after that service. So we decided we wanted to see if we could find them, and this was our first little project. And we just looked on social media and we asked around to people. We see if we could find them. And we heard that they were living sort of homeless on the streets in Oakland somewhere. And we kind of went out and we did the different, clues that we got. And we heard they were maybe near a hospital. And we actually went down to Kaiser Hospital in Oakland and sort of had binoculars in the parking garage looking through these homeless encampments. And I finally just said to Michelle, I said, I'm just going to go down there and start talking to people. So I started walking through these homeless encampments and talking to people. And I was asking if they, knew where they were. And somebody finally said, are you talking about Squid? And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, Squid was Micah's best friend's nickname from the time he was a little kid. They called him Squid. And I said, yeah, absolutely. They said, yeah, they're living here. They're in part of this encampment. So that was our first little project of what we did, trying to go down and help them and figure out what we could do. And we reached out and we found them in this encampment, and we'd go back from time to time and reach out and see if we were ready for help or ready for anything. And, they really weren't, but we'd still go down from time to time and bring them food to the encampments, bring pizza. We'd hang out with them. When Micah's ex-girlfriend was actually in the hospital at the time we found them, and she was having she had a heart infection from sharing dirty needles with people. So it was kind of a heavy duty thing to find, but that was our first project that we did.
Wow. How many more projects have there been? I'm curious. Do you even know if you lost count?
It's funny because we actually hadn't thought about a lot of the projects, and we're just now starting to get kind of a little bigger than we can. The two of us, it's basically, we have board of directors, but basically for the most part, Micah and I do most of the work, and we have full-time jobs. So we're growing and we need other resources. So we have a grant writer that's come in, and he's starting to help us look at different funding opportunities. So he's kind of documenting a lot of the stuff just so he can use for backup for the grants. And it's like, in addition to just our stories, like even the news, like we've been highlighted all this whole week on 4 different news stations this week, and last week was the newspaper. And just this year alone, I think we've probably had about 10 news appearances from earlier in the year to now.
And over the last few years, we're starting to finally try to kind of put together what we've been doing. It's really, even to us, it's kind of shocking once we look back and really realize how many different things that we've been doing over the years and how many projects we've had. From the latest thing we've been getting attention for is this sort of, repurposing of newspaper boxes from, the Press Democrat that gave us to be free Narcan and fentanyl test strip distribution places where people can come get those. And it's kind of the latest project that's getting a lot of, press these days that they've been pushing a whole lot. There's so many projects we've been doing over the last handful of years. It's really even kind of shocking to us.
When Micah Jr. first passed, everyone wants to usually give some sort of a donation or do something after. So we set up an account pretty early on and didn't raise money, but people donated quite a bit. And the first thing we did was we started doing scholarships to sober living environment. So there's a group here in Santa Rosa called Pura Vida. And we kind of partnered with them, and we even had, I think it's still out there now. If you go out to the website, you can see like a scholarship where you can apply for a scholarship from us. And I think that first year we did about 20, was it 20? About 20 scholarships, getting people into 6 weeks of sober living environment through them. And then the following year we did a, just kind of a again, it's COVID, so it was hard to do much fundraising. So we just sent out right before the holidays, sent out kind of a request letter to all our friends, family, it's the end of the year if you want to help us. And that was our, what we were actually designated the funds for, was to do another drive to raise more scholarship monies.
And just recently, I started kind of compiling the scholarships that we've done, and I came up with somewhere around $75,000 that we've given out now in the scholarships.
Wonderful. From what I've noticed also, you've been going out to other families that have lost loved ones, and you've been asking to, hey, let's keep memorializing them. Let's create some posters, right? So when we're out doing events, we've got pictures, and this, again, signifying this life, there wasn't a loss, it wasn't in vain. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Well, I think what really started was right shortly after Micah Jr. passed, we found this organization in Connecticut called Today I Matter. And that's the acronym for their son, Tim, that they lost. And it's called the Poster Project. And their posters are like 3x5s, and they're from like waist up. So they look full, almost full body size.
Awesome.
And so that was the first time I ever sent anything about Micah Jr. out to be on a poster. So he's been on their poster project since, and that was 2019. And there's a lot of different projects out there where you see people doing, like, they want to, at their awareness events, they want to show different ones. So I think we've got Micah Jr. at probably over half the states throughout the U.S. His picture alone's floating around at all different events by now. But you just learn how important it is for grieving families to get their children included. So we were really trying to mirror the Today I Matters project, but those posters are pretty large, and they have to be put in with ground stakes, like in lawn. And so we were having a hard time kind of figuring out which exactly avenue we want to do. But we know we want to include more and more angels. We call them angels, but more and more angels in our projects, because that really.
Today It Matters, they have a great project going. It was really wonderful. And we've gone to Washington, D.C. twice to meet them when they set up sort of their project. And the last time we went, and they set up these posters on the Capitol Mall right in front of the Washington Monument, and it's in the lawn area there. And the last time we went, we set up 640 of these full-size posters, just in these long lines and lines and lines that you walk through. And it's really impactful. And, people come walking through there. And the amazing thing to me when we were there last time is the number of people that sort of came up that would just randomly walk through and not knowing what was there, and then realizing what it was, and they'd start crying. Or I had a number of people come up to me and say, this changed my opinion on how I feel about, people that have passed from overdose or addiction or whatever. You see these pictures of police officers, firefighters, military personnel, doctors, lawyers. They're not just these homeless people that you think, or these, druggy looking people that you think you're going to see on these pictures. And they go, wow, this changes my opinion about how I feel about these things. And that's really impactful. And that's our goal, to try to help change these opinions about how people feel.
That is powerful. That's amazing. That's what we need in this world.
Yeah.
With regards to fundraising now, can people still obviously donate to your cause?
Absolutely. Right now, you can go out to our website. We've got a donation page, micahs.hugs.org, and you can donate for there.
Okay.
We have a lot of parents that, because they've grieved so hard, they've lost their jobs, and they don't know. A lot of them don't have a lot of income. So it's nice to be able to get donations and help do posters for the people that are unable to afford them. We just in April, we were invited to collaborate with the San Francisco Giants, and another mother and I, Carrie, she lost her son Tosh to fentanyl overdose or poisoning. Sorry, and we had the fentanyl awareness game.
Fentanyl awareness game with the Giants.
Giants, and we had about 100 posters that we made of each individual angel, and we put most of them in empty seats. We bought seats for all the angels and put them in there just so you could see the growth of them all. And then we had some parents that did come get their own seats, and we all sat in one section, so all these posters you could see. But there's a lot of parents that couldn't make it to the game because we're on national databases with different families. So like we had this one family from Florida. She had lost her 4 children and her brother and so we had all 5 of them. On her. Yeah, that one's
It's tough.
Very touching.
But we'll say, if it costs so much to get a poster or at the Giants game and to buy a seat and get a poster, but whatever it is, but we also will never turn anybody away if they can't afford it. So, a lot of fundraising goes to make sure that people that can't afford it still get a poster of their loved one. And our scholarship program, a lot of the money goes to our scholarship.
Yeah. And what you're doing is beautiful in a couple of ways, because not only obviously are you commemorating the loved ones, family, we get a chance to remember, we get to talk, we get to, remember all the wonderfuls about the individual we lost. And you're also, for your sake, is you guys are dealing with a community that understands your grief, understands your loss. They're intimate relationships, I find now, for myself. Absolutely. Especially too. My sober community, I can tell them anything and everything about me, and there's no judgment. And so that's a beautiful thing, because we need those, right? Because grief is isolating just as much as addiction can be. And the last thing we want to do is end up, our life is about community and being with each other.
And so much of a lot of, there's a few different avenues that we do, but, the kind of grief support that we do. And there's so much these days, now that it's been 6 years for us, and we've sort of learned how to navigate through this process after 6 years, that there's so much now that we keep on getting people that have freshly lost loved ones to fentanyl or to addiction or to overdose that keep on coming into our circle. And we kind of try to help them navigate through this process as new people come into this. And see what we can do to help them work for their grief. And it's really helpful to have sort of a community or a group of people that sort of understands where you're coming from. Because I think so many people, especially people that have lost children, and so many people around them don't quite get it, don't quite understand. And that grief is just it's just so devastating. It's so powerful. And to have even a small group of people that sort of understand that grief and can help console you is really.
Yeah.
That's a big piece that I've really kind of have been focusing more on lately. It's like, for one, it's hard for me to kind of understand, because it's my stepchild that we lost. So I don't think I can even come close to understanding what, people are feeling when they actually lost their actual child that were theirs, I guess you'd say. But I do see how broken up a lot of these people are. And that some of them just feel so alone and helpless. A lot of them have lost their jobs. Their families are, been torn apart, a lot of riffraff because people don't understand what they're going through. And a lot of them are single now because of everything, and they're so alone. So I just kind of started putting together just get-togethers. We call them treats instead of like a retreat, but even a day afternoon to go have lunch together. And we try to spread them throughout California a little bit just because of people's distances. But last 2 years we've been working on getting together, and we just had a big one up in Fort Bragg. It was kind of really nice, more of a weekend retreat. And we had about 25 family members up there. And we have another friend that lives here in Hillsburg near us that lost her son. And she started a program called Locks for Loss. And up on there's a bridge in Fort Bragg where she's putting locks with pictures of everyone that's passed from the fentanyl epidemic. And Micah Jr., I think, was lock number 4 or 5. And now she's probably about 100 or so. Like good of me. And so there was about, like I said, about 20 of us went up, and some of the moms got to actually put the lock for the first time on there, or some got to see the lock that's been put on there, and they have never seen it before. So we had a really nice get together and came back out afterwards to like a vigil ceremony and had candles and whatnot and did s'mores. And it was just nice to be together and someone that could completely understand and have empathy for each other. And you see how important it is when these families get together and bond over like this.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is so important too, especially for those newly grieving ones, is that, for me personally, in not understanding it right and trying to be, a husband and trying to be still a father to my other children and trying to move through life, is that in not processing the grief, right, it will start projecting itself outward in other areas of your life. Yeah. And that's something that obviously exacerbates what you're struggling with anyway, because people aren't, they're separated from that grief, right? And so now all of a sudden you're maybe lashing out, or now you're ruminating, or now your paralysis analysis, all these things just can start manifesting in you if you don't process that grief. And it eventually gets itself out one way, shape, and form. One of the ways that was beneficial for me was writing letters to them. Oh, wow. And writing letters to them, I was able to just offload a ton of emotion. And it was cleansing, right? It allowed me to finally get through a layer of grief that I was unwilling to address. And the irony is that I wasn't able to do that in addiction. I did it in recovery. And so, yeah, and that's something that I want people to understand, those that are freshly grieving someone. It's a mountain of pain. It's a mountain of pain, and it's suffocating, and it makes you question everything about life and existence. The things that had any magnitude in your life completely evaporate, and everything goes into question. And we need to get help for that. We need to get in front of people. Therapy is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And I always tell people, just, you got to be patient. You know, my biggest problem in the beginning is I just expected to get through this grief quickly and move on with my life. And it just didn't work, you know, and I wasn't patient with myself. I didn't give myself the time that I needed to sort of get through this. And also, like, I am a different person today than I was before I lost my son, you know, and there's differences. And I push hard to get back to be that exact same person that I was, and I wasn't getting there. Finally, when I sort of accepted the fact that I am a different person, and that's okay. I don't have to get 100% back to where I was. And accepting that at some point is something that really sort of helped me kind of move forward and say, okay, I'm not going to be exactly that same person again. I'm a new person now. I'm a different person now, and that's okay.
Yeah, not to be, in an analogy, I guess it's almost like an innocence lost, right?
Yeah.
It's an innocence lost, and that pain, yeah, you can't go back to the way you were. You know, the body keeps the score, right? So it will start manifesting you in sickness, potentially in illness, right? If you don't take care of yourself. And the unfortunate thing is that in grief, especially upon obviously how the relationship was established, that person's significance in your life, whose support network is post, you know, the loss, it drives you into an acceptance that life isn't worth living anymore anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and just, you know, basically just collapse, you know, in a sense, right? Just, you know, not care about anything anymore, right? And that's not healthy either, right? We don't want to see people, you know, double whammy themselves. But yeah, so it's processing.
And I've always said, like, to me, it was amazing for me to sort of realize that grief can be physical. Like I felt at a certain point that, like, there was days when I literally felt like I physically couldn't get out of bed. It was just like my body would not function. You know, it was that powerful and that overwhelming that it was just, no, I'm just not getting out of bed today. You know, it was tough, and that's not who I am. You know, that was a tough thing for me to come to grips with.
Yeah, it was. I was like 36, 37 years old when I lost my daughter, and I remember distinctly expressing, I said, I feel like I'm 80 years old right now.
Yeah.
Everything was sucked out of me. Well, God bless you too. I appreciate you. I'm so thankful that you're local, because we're going to find a way to connect.
Absolutely.
We're going to find a way to connect. I would love to come to one of your events and be able to have good conversations, have meaningful conversations, talk about life, loss, love, all those things. I'm more than happy to talk about addiction. But again, like I said, my podcast speaks for itself. I want to be an advocate for this. Where I'm done with shaming addiction and shaming addicts. I'm done with it. And
you know, when I was in a friends and family support group before Micah passed, it was friends or family members of addicts is basically who was the support group. And after he passed, I went back for one or two more meetings there, you know, to talk with the people that were there. And the biggest thing that they said to me is, please don't hide this. Please don't keep it quiet. Please be open about what happened and share this so people don't, you know, help not feel that shame. And we realized too, when he passed, like, if you read people's obituaries in the paper, and very often the obituaries will say is that somebody passed for unknown reasons or suddenly out of the whatever. And there's two reasons. There's two things that when they don't say how they died, and it's drug overdose and it's suicide. Those are the two things where people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to say, this is what happened. This is how it happened. They just want to kind of skirt that issue. I mean, that was when we really said, okay, we're not going to hide this. We're going to be open about this. We're going to talk about it. And we're going to, especially because Micah was a popular athlete, jock sort of person that you wouldn't expect. You know, we wanted to tell his story when we wanted other people to understand that, you know, how many people do we say when we're trying to approach and they say, we don't need your help. You know, our kid isn't a drug addict. We don't need your help. Nobody in our family is a drug addict. And we say, well, you know, this affects everybody. You don't have to think your kid is a drug addict. You don't have to have that, you know, that approach.
I've personally interfaced with 4 times sold businesses, multimillionaires who are struggling with it. I've seen people, CEOs, execs, People, doctors, psychologists, I've seen it all come through that and people go, no. I'm like, no, you'd be surprised that that's actually the majority of it. Most of the addicts in the world actually are fairly intelligent.
Yeah. I know doctors that prescribe themselves Vicodin. I know of those stories.
Right. One thing I was curious about, because you kind of touch on this just now with regards to, obviously either keeping it quiet or exposing it to the world. I think what happens is, especially with these two things, right? What ends up happening is that the guilt gets transferred to the survivors. So now they're going, what did I do wrong to not see that they were struggling, that they wanted to kill themselves? Or what did I not see? What were the signs that I was, and so it's obviously you have a different type of story with regards to Micah Jr., with how obviously you were witnessing the struggle and there was efforts, right? But if somebody was blindly, all of a sudden wakes up and finds that their loved one has passed from a drug overdose and you were completely oblivious to it, there's a tremendous amount of guilt in that, right? And I think that's I think the number one reason why those two things don't get discussed in an obituary.
Unfortunately, we found a number of situations too with people that we know that have lost loved ones, and parents that are absolutely convinced that their child just tried this one pill once and was never using drugs, and they passed away from this one time. And because we have the connections that we have and the people that we talk to, there's quite a few stories that I know behind the scenes of what the parents know, that their kid was using drugs quite a bit. Their kid was very into drugs, and their kid was in, but their parents, they're not going to admit that. They're not going to accept that. They don't want to hear that. Their kid just happened to one time. It's the only time they ever messed with drugs. And, unfortunately, they don't want to come to terms with the fact that, their kid was struggling. Their kid was using drugs on a regular basis, but they don't want to see it. They don't want to hear that.
Yeah, and obviously when we look at the nuclear family now, I mean, we're so stinking busy, right? I mean, I know what the pace of life was back in the 80s. I know what it's like now. And I go, whoa. I mean, yeah, there's no more sitting at the dinner table as a family and having dinner every night, 5 days a week like you used to. There's no, I mean, we're running around like a chicken with our heads cut off. So unfortunately, it causes a self-centeredness, right, a little bit. And so if we don't have time to raise our family, or, we will definitely go into denial. I even recognize that with my own children. It's like, man, I could have done some things better when I was younger, right? And unfortunately, we're doing the best that we can with the best tools that we have. Something was going wrong in their life to want to take it in the first place. I think it's a very rare thing for somebody to experiment for one time in OD, right?
It happens from time to time, but it's not the majority. For sure, it does happen, but most of the time, I think people don't realize how much their loved one, their kid, was sort of struggling and doing more than they expected. There's a story that I heard not too long ago. In Vietnam, about 20% of all the soldiers in Vietnam were regularly using heroin. And we thought that, like, when these people all came back from Vietnam, that we were going to have this big influx of heroin addicts that we were going to have to deal with, right? And amazingly, everybody was sort of surprised. The vast majority of those people, their heroin users in Vietnam, when they came home, just stopped using heroin. And what they realized is, like, okay, they were in a really bad situation, which was causing them to want to self-medicate with heroin when they were in Vietnam. And when they came back to their families, when they came back to a different situation where they were no longer in that place, they were able to most of them were able to just sort of stop using heroin. And we didn't have this big influx that we thought. And the reality is, we start realizing that the physical addiction to opioids or whatever drug people are using, they're bad and they're terrible and withdrawals are bad. But the reality is that it's the mental addictions, the reason why people are using those drugs in the first place. It's the self-medication. It's the root of why somebody feels like they need to use the drug is so much more powerful than whatever that actual addiction to the drug is.
Yeah, it's interesting that you went this way on this conversation. So I am the son of a drug addict. My biological father was in Vietnam. And so long story short, as far as I found out that I was legally adopted by the man that was raising me when I was 13 years old. Wow. My mom was legally my mother, and obviously, but I ended up finding out when I was 13 that my mom was actually married before, and I'm a product of that relationship. Fast forward 2009. So yeah, a couple of years before I lost my daughter. So I was 34. I went and I found him.
Wow.
I'd never met him, and I went and I found him, and I got to hear his story. He came from an abusive family, a father that was especially abusive. He jumped ship, obviously had a girlfriend when he left for Vietnam, but got addicted to heroin over there. I had asked him, I said, how in the world are you getting heroin if you've got your COs out there, watching you guys? He goes, how'd you think we got it? He goes, they were the drunks, we were the drug addicts. Because that's how you survived in the jungle. That's how you survive in jungle warfare. It's so scary, right? That you're constantly seeking an escape. And so I hear what you're saying, right? You've removed the bad situation and they get better. But he unfortunately was already dealing with a bad childhood. So it was a recipe for failure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So he ended up, while he was in Vietnam, he ended up getting a Dear John letter from his girlfriend at the time, basically saying, goodbye. It devastated him, but he came home, met my mom, had me. She kind of did some thinking about, I thought I could change him, right? He was really sweet deep down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he would be selling things out of the house, to pay for his heroin habit. And he was injecting, he was freebasing it. She'd come home and he basically had sold the washer and dryer and he was in the bathroom basically shooting up. And she got to a point, that, I don't think it was a year that she basically said sayonara. But the irony is that I actually met him while I was still I'd never recovered from my addiction. I was still in and out of it, and understanding his story and his life, because he was homeless for a period of time in Fresno. He ultimately got a full VA medical ride to basically support him. And he ultimately got off of heroin, and basically they were giving him very, very, very small doses of methadone just to keep him stable. But yeah, that's a whole nother, unfortunately, when I heard his story, when I understand it, it's just like, he didn't have a chance. He didn't have a chance. And we're wiser now, right? We are wiser now. So let's use that wisdom, right? Let's use this wisdom to not just simply, kick somebody to the curb for a drug habit, right? I mean, obviously it's a slippery slope. It's one of the things that I've been battling with as, in recovery and trying to help those understand that are dealing with somebody in their life that has addiction, right? Yeah. How do you approach them? I've actually done some wet work, meaning I've gone and basically gotten somebody into a rehab while they were under, and I did it solo. It was the last time I'll ever do that, because I'll tell you, it was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever dealt with. And they were wanting to go, but it was still one of the most dangerous, terrifying experiences in my life. So I don't want, we need education. We need to break these walls. We need to help these people that are under feel better about themselves, find the missing link. And unfortunately, that's rocky in and of itself. The reason why I relapsed is I had a hard time accepting my mental health.
Yeah, for sure.
And in not accepting that, it ended up becoming just, Dustin, this is a willpower thing. What are you doing? This is are you not strong enough? Are you not disciplined enough to control, and we play that game with ourselves, which is foolishness.
So we were in Europe last year. We did a trip through Europe, and we ended our trip through Europe in Amsterdam, which, drug capital of the world, right? Amsterdam. And so I wanted to, find out a little bit of information, and we went into a bar in the red light district, and I asked the bartender, what's your fentanyl problem like here? What's your overdose rate like? And she says, we don't have fentanyl, and very, very few people ever die from overdose or drug poisoning here. It just doesn't really tend to happen. I thought, wow, that's crazy. This is everybody thinks of Amsterdam red light district as the drug capital of the world. How's that possible, So I started looking into it more. And what's really interesting is that most people think that drugs are legal there, and that's not true. Actually, almost all drugs are not legal, but they're also not criminalized. And what I came to understand is that the big difference is they think of their drug problem as a health problem and not a criminal problem. And they have no crime that goes along with their drug problem. And even though heroin, on the streets, is illegal, they actually have 3 different sites around Amsterdam where you can get pharmaceutical grade, government funded free heroin. If you're struggling, you can go there and get it for free. And the really amazing part that I learned about that is the vast majority of the people that are going there regularly using heroin still have jobs and are still members of society. They're sort of like a functioning alcoholic in our society, which isn't a good thing, right? You don't want to be using heroin regularly, obviously. But if you remove the criminal aspect out of that situation where you don't get felonies and you can still have a job and you can still sort of function, and it's pharmaceutical grade, not fentanyl, heroin, they're struggling in life and they need to get help, but they're not dying. There's almost nobody is dying in that society because of drug overdose. And it's kind of a crazy different way to think about it. You remove that, they have no, there's no, mafias or cartels, or there's no crime happening about it. It's just some people struggling with a health problem that they need to get help
No, that's beautiful. I mean, we can always do better, right? We can always learn and grow on these things. And I agree
Absolutely.
with you. I think that one of the worst things you do, because I even recognized it myself the first week that I was out of my inpatient treatment, was that I basically started twiddling my thumbs. I'm like, oh my goodness, what do I do now? I'm home. I'm back in everything familiar. And now I'm supposed to just kind of get on with it. And I'm like, oh no, this isn't happening. So obviously having that compassion, giving people the time to come to it, right, and get the terms and to feel better about themselves and get those assistance programs going. That just opens up doors. And again, when we put somebody in the jail cell for their drug addiction, right?
Yeah.
And you get them out, they're going to do the same. They're going to feel the same way I did when I got out of detox. What now? Back to where I was.
Yeah, we actually there's a really wonderful book and movie called A Beautiful Boy, and in the movie it's Steve Carell who's the comedian, but he plays a very serious role in this movie, and he does a great job. And it's a local family that's a true story about a local family from Point Reyes here that
Okay.
they live in Point Reyes now. And we actually went to a talk that the father and son did in Sonoma at the Hannah Boyce Center, and we met the real characters from this. And I talking to the son, and he said he'd been through rehab 10 times in his life, and the 10th time he was in rehab, they asked him, like, what's your mental health diagnosis? And he said, I've never had a mental health diagnosis, which is sort of shocking if you can go through rehab 10 times without having a mental health diagnosis. So they finally gave him a mental health diagnosis, and they determined that he was bipolar. They put him on the correct medication for bipolar disorder, and he's been clean for 15 years since that, because he's medicating the proper way instead of self-medicating with heroin.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing that was with me as well. And again, trying to remove, first of all, get past that shame and guilt of whatever mental health diagnosis I'm going to get. But then I get to deal with, unfortunately, a little bit of a slippery slope in finding the right meds. Right.
Yeah.
So we got to be patient, right? Like you had said earlier, we got to have patience. We got to be gentle on ourselves in trying to get to this end point, right? Of feeling just better in life. That's the goal, is that we just feel better in life without having to use something to get there. Yeah. This has been great, you guys. I appreciate it. I definitely tell everyone, I said, this is therapy for me too. So it is a little bit of a selfish endeavor, because I recognize the only way I'm going to stay in recovery is by staying in recovery. This only works if I work it. And so this is my service to the world, because these programs that you are offering, I really hope you blow up. I really hope that it invokes change in politicians' minds and wanting to readdress this in a different way. I hope it opens up everyone's eyes. And again, it's not an easy thing, but we also, we need patience, in that regard too.
That's a positive thing right now is it feels like there's kind of just recently a bit of a change in society about the way they're feeling about this thing, which is really hopeful to me. And the overdose death rates in the last 2 years are starting to come down finally. They're still way too high, but they're starting to come in the right direction. We've been really trying to get into the schools to try to educate kids, and like the schools have been somewhat resistant. And even then, when they let us in, they'll let us educate, but they never let us you can't do product. We give out Narcan as a big part of what we do, and they would never let us. This last year, schools are starting to allow us to give Narcan out to the students at school. They realize that there's no negative harm there. There's nothing wrong. And just yesterday, we actually got a message from the West County School Board, a member of the school board from West County, and she asked us to come into Anley High School when school starts up again, and she wants to train the whole student body in assembly. So we're figuring we're going to have 1,200 high school kids that we're going to be in there training when school starts back up again. So I think society's starting to come around and starting to feel differently about it, and it's really hopeful to me.
Yeah, I think, it all starts with love, right? That's the only way we're going to get through this. So
100%.
Oh, Michelle, Micah, the floor is yours. I mean, is there anything else you would like to talk about today? This is your time. I definitely am going to obviously let everybody know how to contact you. I'll put that in the description, as well as I'll put some information in the header here for this video. And I wish you continued success. We're going to plan on doing a second part, and I think you and I will process more what the grief was like to help those that have lost somebody move on and live on, and not do it in a way that makes them feel like they're discounting the life and they're discounting the death of the one that they lost, because I know that that's a heavy thing for people. You feel like in moving on, I push them to the side. No, you're honoring them in your life, right? And you guys are a great example. I mean, straight up, I'm impressed. I had ambitions on starting something for my daughter after she passed, and I couldn't get myself to do it. So I commend you. So God bless you, and
with me having it be my son and her stepson that passed, and there was some more strength that she had in her. So there was a big part of this that was sort of the strength that she had and being able to sort of move me forward. So she's a lot of the planning and the organization and the push through a lot of this that allows me to then move forward. And she really helps me in so many ways that I couldn't have done without her. For sure.
Well, we appreciate you, Michelle.
Yeah.
But hey, you guys have a great weekend, and enjoy the rest of July. And we're going to get you back on the show soon, and we're going to get a little bit more intimate about all of this. Okay?
Sounds great. Thank you. We appreciate you.
Take care.
Take
Take care. Bye bye.
Take care.
All right. Goodbye.